Hello friends, I am Mr.X Dreams, and welcome to Creep O'Clock. Beyond the mortal world, there is a realm known as the Void. It is a place unlike the plane that you occupy at this moment. A vast, limitless playground where anything you can imagine may appear before your very eyes. It can be a custom-crafted hell, or a sanctuary of endless wonders. I know the dark tides of the Void well. I have wandered them for eons, offering guidance and safe harbor to those blessed with the gift of light. A Void Walker knows that these mysterious waters can also reflect one's true nature, and sometimes the darkness of a human heart can be inevitable.
During the late hours of the night, my mind traveled to some faraway place beyond the constraints of known reality. I found myself walking through a void of darkness, my involuntary stride upon the unseen ground guiding me through the endless realm. I eventually entered a domain tinted by twilight. A dark monolith stood at the center of the bleak illumination. I approached the standing apparatus with a mixture of dreadful caution and morbid fascination. Though its design was rudimentary, its placement within the gloom held some unknown significance. A violet shine appeared upon the construct's surface, disrupting the gray and black patterns surrounding me. The light contorted until it shaped into a horrid face that donned a metallic respirator connected to a series of tubes that disappeared into its torso. Its soulless black eyes glared at me with the malice of an evil reflection, causing me to take frantic steps back. The configuration approached the transparent threshold and hovered into the pervading twilight. Looking upon the complexity of the creature's design was like watching someone burn to death. Terrifying, yet intriguing. It wore a cyclopean armor embedded with rusted gears that rotated as it moved. Its arms were an amalgamation of tubing networked across exposed muscles. A cylindrical headgear surmounted the figure, making it resemble a great pharaoh. The gravity of my lack of understanding summoned a gripping fear that caused me to fall backward. I gazed upon the elevated conundrum as it moved towards me with an unnatural grace. Its shadow towered over me, and a violet hue flickered from inside its dark eyes as a distorted voice resounded from its respirator.
Do not be frightened. I am the Emissary. Your arrival has signified that your potential will be fulfilled if that is what you desire. However, you must first shape your mortal perception.
The mysterious being in the realm of twilight faded into the familiar textures of my bedroom ceiling. I lay there, listening to the soft rattle of the table fan that rested on the nightstand next to my bed, while I examined the nonsensical patterns above me. One could argue that I left one nightmare and woke into another. I came to my silent conclusions about the thing that called itself the Emissary. The rusted cogs, the network of tubes, the towering headgear that resembled a massive piston. I'd seen all of these things before at some point in my meaningless life. Dreams will construct things from random information stored inside the brain. Although the results can be interesting, they were essentially meaningless. The mystery of the Emissary had been solved by a man still in his underwear, staring up at his squiggly ceiling. My eyes averted to the window that sat adjacent to my bed, and I watched the faint light of the dawn bloom into a bright sunrise. A cloud of smoke expelled from my lungs as I sat on my front porch, thinking about the ruins of my life. My thumb moved across a plastic screen as digital images of happier times scrolled past. I could not look at them without my soul being overwhelmed by anger and regret. The inner turmoil would soon have me pondering questions of a philosophical nature, bordering on self-pity. If two people love each other, why can't they just be together? Why isn't that ever enough? Why wasn't I enough? No matter how many hours I spent on the internet, combing through online forums or watching videos that told me my anger was justified, it did little to lift my spirit. Society can change, but human nature will always remain the same. This world has little sympathy for a broken man, and the depths of my damage were invisible to those around me. My thoughts were interrupted as I observed, with disdain, a maroon Dodge Dynasty pulling into my driveway. Die nasty. I knew who it was, and I had absolutely no intention of standing up and walking out to greet them with disingenuous pleasantries. The girl I once knew exited the passenger side door of the vehicle. Her jeans did very little to hide the loveliness of her figure as she made her way to the front porch.
Hello, Charles.
A once familiar voice spoke. I set down my cigarette on the ashtray next to me and watched the smoke rise from the burning ember, then begrudgingly offered the coldest of responses. "Hello, Julia." I looked into her green eyes and thought about how we used to make love on top of the washing machine in my garage. The memory of her soft moans reminiscent of a unity I thought would last forever. However, fate hardly ever caters to such expectations.
How are you doing?
"Peachy," I responded. My eyes averted to the Dynasty still sitting in the driveway with its engine running. A man sat in its driver's seat and stared back at me with intense apprehension. I decided to ask the obvious. "Why's David here?" The look in Julia's eyes suggested that she predicted this line of questioning, but had held out hope that she wouldn't have to explain to me why her upgrade had accompanied her.
Please, Charles, I don't want to fight. I'm just here to get the rest of my things.
Oh, well, you're going to love what I have to say. I picked my cigarette back up and took another drag before enlightening my former lover. "Then you should get back in your car and have Mr. Perfect drive you down to the local dump, because I threw the rest of your shit out."
You did what?
"That's right. I put all your stuff into boxes, drove it down to the dumpsters, and tossed them."
Even the necklace my grandmother gave me?
I couldn't help but crack an amused smile. Whatever I had with Julia was dead and buried. What did I have to lose by being honest for once? "Yes, I even threw out that hideous thing."
You son of a bitch!
Julia wailed, tears welling up in her eyes. The commotion caused the driver's side door of the Dynasty to open, and Mr. Perfect emerged from the vehicle.
"Is everything all right, Julia?"
She turned to him with dripping eyes and unintelligible sobs. It was a truly pathetic display of anguish, but one that I understood all too well. A broken heart can bring out the worst in people, and for me, sorrow eventually turns to cruelty. The intrusive bravado radiating from my driveway was beyond my ability to ignore. "Everything's fine, David. I was just telling Julia here that her belongings no longer reside at this residence." My words carried a thick, sarcastic undertone to them. My eyes were met with the cold stare of a man who spent at least 3 hours a day lifting weights. He did not seem to appreciate my sense of humor. Mr. Perfect made his way over to Julia and wrapped his veiny arms around her. After whispering something in her ear, Julia collected herself and nodded her head. They began walking back to the Dynasty, still embracing each other. So fucking dramatic. Mr. Perfect opened the passenger side door, and before Julia took a seat, she gave me some parting words.
I will be filing a police report, Charles. You had no right to throw out my stuff, and I will be pressing charges.
I smirked. This was about as close as I would get to settling the score. I'm sorry, Charles. You're just not good enough anymore. I'm going to be with David now because that's what makes me happy. And you don't get a say-so in the matter. You just have to respect my decision. I don't have to respect a damn thing, Julia. Personally, I think a few discarded items is a small price to pay for playing games with my fucking life. Well, you tell them where to find me, and have a wonderful day, I said, as I placed the cigarettes between my lips. I was met with another hateful scowl as Mr. Perfect backed out of the driveway. I methodically raised my right hand, ensuring he saw the extended middle digit. A loud rumble bellowed from the Dynasty's engine as it accelerated down the street. Maybe we can be friends after she's done siphoning you too, I hopelessly thought to myself as I watched the tailgates disappear. The sun sank into the horizon and gave way to the night sky. Julia's visit had left a bad taste in my mouth throughout the day. I hated myself for becoming this vulnerable. My dedication and passion towards her was pure. I wanted to do the right thing in a world dominated by self-serving ambition, yet this sentiment was not reciprocated. My story was another chapter in the tome of human misery. Despite all of this, something inside me, buried beneath an ocean of pain, still yearned for her. I resigned to my resting place and closed my eyes, as my memories brought me back to the day of my mother's funeral. The loss of my beloved mother to an unexpected accident had devastated me, the only person who'd ever truly loved me unconditionally. All composure was lost as I squeezed Julia's hand and stared down at my mother's coffin with overflowing eyes. Tragedy forces us to reflect on our own mortality, but the truth is that we don't want to die alone. The loss left a deep crater inside of me, one that would never truly be healed. I might have come to terms with my mother's death had her life ended on a more peaceful note.
As I walk through the valley in the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for the Spirit of Almighty God is with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
The preacher's words offered no solace as I imagined my mother's horrified face, illuminated by the headlights of an oncoming semi-truck, before it utterly obliterated her. The eulogy became indecipherable murmurs as I was consumed by somnolence. The world of shadow welcomed me once again as I traversed through its sightless continuum. A dreadful dissonance echoed in the surrounding darkness like the melody of feasting gluttons. Like before, I was led to a sanctuary of twilight, where a dark construct stood. Its appearance instantly reminded me of the mechanical stranger who spoke to me during my last visit. The Emissary. As soon as the recognition crossed my subconscious, a prodigious beam of blinding light descended from the unseen heavens and illuminated the dark form before me. The light revealed an ominous metal chamber equipped with various straps and chains. Its revelation was accompanied by an unearthly reverberation. The sounds became a deafening crescendo as a black, twisted mass ascended from the depths of the gloom. I gazed upon the erected mound of screaming faces and writhing limbs with a terror unmatched by any previous experience. The shapeless form engulfed the chamber, sending arches from beneath its thick surface towards its pinnacle. A repulsive, belching noise resounded from within the mass as fluids were projected from the faces near its summit. The vile apparition began to recede back into the gloom, and the screams of despair faded. The chamber became visible again. A blindfolded man now occupied its restraints.
What the fuck is going on? Where am I? Please, someone, anyone, help!
The man cried. I tried calling out to him, but the words would not come forth. The grinding of unseen mechanics preceded the appearance of two shining cylinders on either side of the chamber.
What the fuck is that? Someone get me the hell out of here!
The blindfolded man shouted as several clawed tendrils emerged from the cylinders and surrounded him. The claws shaped themselves into blades and descended upon the suspended subject. The man shrieked in pain as his flesh was penetrated. I felt bile rising, and I covered my mouth with my hands. As cynical as I am, I did not wish to see this man be mutilated beyond recognition. But I was unable to close my eyes. The man's moribund wails were cut short by a final impalement to the jugular. Fresh blood fell from his open mouth and mingled with the rest of his bleeding wounds. The blades retracted from the anatomy as an enlarged tendril appeared behind the chamber and attached itself to the man's bare cranium. The restraints that held the lacerated body evaporated as it was lifted into the illumination above the structure, where it was surrounded by additional machinery, and a series of needles skewered the blindfold, penetrating the eyes beneath. As rivers of red flowed down the man's face, I felt the limits of my endurance slipping away, as the visage of horrific mechanization drifted into the ether, and the familiar textures returned. I probably should have been paying attention to what the uniformed man standing at the bottom of the steps was telling me. Instead, I sat on my front porch, examining the glowing ember making its way down the cigarette I held, and reflected on the decision I made years ago to ignore the health risks of my daily habit. I found it ironic that I could not self-terminate, but I also didn't see the value of preserving my life. I suppose slowly killing myself with tobacco sticks was a compromise. If I exited this world lying on a hospital bed with tubes up my nose, who would honestly give a shit? We're all heading to some kind of afterlife, right? Maybe it'll be a paradise where things like cancer, betrayal, and vanity don't exist, and we all coincide as a collective in blissful peace and harmony. Or maybe everything just stops. Forever. Whatever the case, until the corrosion of time liberated me, the world of consequence would be my domain. The officer standing outside my front porch examined his notepad as he went through the passionless notions.
Julia said that you two recently went through a difficult separation, and she came here yesterday to get the rest of her belongings. She also mentioned something about a necklace. She says that you told her that you threw everything out. Is that true?
While still watching the cancerous vapors evaporate into the world, I responded to the man with the badge. No, it wasn't a separation. It was a severance. The officer only offered a puzzled look as he stood there with his open notepad. I continued. The word separation implies that two people came to a mutual agreement. There was nothing mutual about the situation whatsoever. I felt the officer's judgmental eyes sizing me up as I put out the cigarettes in the ashtray next to me. Ah, I knew that look. Another person off-put by thorough observation and understanding. The man with the badge can think what he likes. His satisfaction and suspicions were not important to me. It all comes down to what he can prove, a concept that was not lost on me when I discarded Julia's things. along with that ugly-ass necklace. I watched the last bit of smoke disappear from the pile of ash before I offered the man with the badge self-serving falsehoods. To answer your question, I didn't throw anything out, and I don't know where her necklace is. As far as I'm aware, she took all of her things with her when she moved out 3 weeks ago.
She told us a very different story, and she has a witness that corroborated everything.
Oh, you mean the stud that she left me for? That guy's taken her side. Shocker. My sarcasm wasn't usually this obvious, but I felt it was warranted. Look, officer, she's either mistaken or she's wasting your time. We were together for 3 years, and I could speak from experience when I say Julia can put on a good sob story. She came here yesterday with her witness and expected me to just allow them to poke around inside my house. I looked the uniformed man in the eyes with a smirk. Well, there's only so much a guy can take, am I right? There existed a conniving man inside Charles Sebastian Crawford, and he was well versed in the art of deception. The man with the badge was bound by the esoteric law, although mighty, under the right circumstances, it could be manipulated. The officer nodded. I could tell that he recognized I wasn't going to make this easy for Julia. Having no avenue to refute my version of events, his next words carried a hint of relief.
So, it's your word against hers.
Translation: this is now a matter of civil litigation, and it's no longer my problem. I offered a genuine smile. Looks that way, officer. The man jotted something down in his notepad before snapping it shut. He did not offer a bid farewell as he began to walk back towards his patrol car, which sat where the Dynasty had the day before. I predicted that he would simply board his cruiser and drive off. Perhaps he'd call Julia at some point and give her the bad news. Much to my surprise, he instead stopped mid-stride and said something in a noticeably monotone voice.
There is darkness within you, friend.
The remark from the police officer, who had previously seemed slightly annoyed and severely disinterested in the situation, had actually struck a chord with me, forcing me to leave my own mind and be one with reality. I stood up from my chair. What did you just say? The man with the badge looked over his shoulder, revealing the left side of his face. His one visible eye glowed in contrast to his dark complexion. I thought I had him figured out the moment he exited his car. He was just a mundane enforcer of the law. However, his glowing eye suggested something of an enigmatic nature. I was not dreaming. I was awake, standing on the front porch of my home. The monotone voice came again, carrying methodically vague undertones.
You are beyond my reach. I can only hope that your better nature prevails.
The voice belonged to someone who might have had the answers to the many questions that plagued my restless mind. But all I did was stand there, dumbfounded, and watched as the officer got back into his patrol car and disappeared down the street. I sat back down and attempted to piece together the events that had just unfolded before my eyes. In my 30 years of existence, I've never been this perplexed by something, and I found it invigorating. After 30 minutes of deliberation, I had come to the conclusion that the officer's words were not his own. Something had spoken through him. If I tracked him down and asked the officer to explain himself, he would likely not remember anything, and would probably write me a citation for driving with expired tags. It occurred to me that the stranger with the luminous eyes was somehow connected to my nocturnal travels, but perhaps in an adversarial way. This was nothing more than my mind drawing wild speculations. Suddenly, there came a familiar, yet out-of-place, noise from inside my house. Everyone knows that sound a camera makes when the shutter snaps a picture. I could think of no earthly reason why that sound would be coming from my dwelling. I stood in the open doorway for several minutes before cautiously entering. The corridor led to the kitchen, which had a connecting bathroom on the far side. I estimated that this was the origin of the disturbance. As I approached, the sharp noise became louder. I carefully peeked around the archway to see that the bathroom door was open. A curvy figure dressed in a short skirt that left little to the imagination stood before the vanity. I exited the hallway and positioned myself perpendicular to the bathroom door, bewildered by the sight of a woman in my home. Though she had her back turned to me, I couldn't help but feel slightly aroused. Her tight black outfit revealed a fine pair of legs that led up to a heart-shaped backside. Her upper body was covered by a tight black sweatshirt that outlined a toned physique. The hair was dark and fell into place at all the right angles. This was the body of a woman who belonged on a billionaire's yacht off the coast of Dubai. Considering the rewards this world offers to such exceptional beauty further vexed me as to why this specimen was in my house, apparently taking pictures of herself. However, in my experience, having an attractive shell does not guarantee a sound mind. In fact, quite the contrary. But at the end of the day, the world's best-looking intruder is still an intruder, and must be dealt with as such.
Who are you, and what are you doing in my house?
The figure's head perked up, then slowly turned to face me. A pair of piercing violet eyes caused me to stagger and fall. The woman's facial features were a visage of duality, smooth, toned skin that ended just under the eyes. The entire lower half of her face was of a skeletal nature. Amused by my terror, the woman let out a morbid laugh as she emerged from the bathroom doorway. A voice crackled from inside the rows of unmoving silver teeth.
Hello there, I'm the Defiler. Don't you think I'm pretty?
Her violet eyes flashed, followed by the rapid-fire sounds of a snapping shutter.
Oh, such a beautiful fear.
I was bound by terror, paralyzed to my kitchen floor. I looked on and whimpered like a wounded dog waiting to be put out of its misery. The Defiler's optic hue gleamed as she tilted her head to one side.
It's time for you to sleep now.
She revealed a black cavity embedded into the palm of her left hand, and a spiral of violet energy came forth and formed a helix of light that overcame me. My fear was overtaken by involuntary lethargy, and the sight of the tinted light soon faded as I plummeted into the depths once again. I felt the gravity of my insignificance as I walked upon a black surface, looking out into an abyss that could not be seen as a thunder of celestial emanations echoed above. A path was soon illuminated by a forming gloom on the horizon. As I approached, I saw pulsating forms writhing in the darkness, as a cacophony of sickening lamentations and moans of pleasure oozed from them. These repulsive masses extended into the gloom, and I could decipher moving limbs and bobbing heads as they groped, licked, and gnawed at each other. I noticed a hooded figure standing among the debauchery. It then began to make its way towards me. I felt the fear begin to stir within me. However, a snap cut through the soundscape, and I felt my trepidation instantly melt away as the silhouette emerged from the obscurity. Beneath a dark cloak was a pale face that donned a black blindfold with several needles that skewered the areas where the eyes would have been. A familiar violet glow radiated from the tips of the protrusions. We awkwardly faced each other as the moving masses continued their perverted recreations. A raspy voice came from its black lips, breaking the stagnation.
I have temporarily suppressed your fear to converse with you.
Who are you? And what is this place?
I do not have a name. I have a title, granted to me by the one I serve. I am the Foreseer. We reside in the domain of Ophiomorphous.
What the cloaked man said didn't mean anything to me, but somehow made perfect sense.
What the hell am I doing here?
The Foreseer offered no explanation. Instead, he folded his gaunt hands together under his cloak and walked past me.
Come and walk with me, Charles.
The cloaked man and I walked along the moaning masses in awkward silence. I gathered that the question that I asked before did not have a simple answer. After taking in my macabre surroundings, I decided to ask a more obvious question. What are they?
The remnants of a wasted potential. They wait to be devoured by the one I serve. Until then, they wallow in their own primitive urges.
Is this what will become of me?
That depends on if you allow the limitations of your mortal perception to consume you.
What the hell does that mean? And you never answered my earlier question. Why am I here? The Foreseer shifted his head to look out into the terrain of wasted potential. I had silently deduced that even though the creature's eyes were surely destroyed, he did not need them to see.
There is only so much I can reveal to you. We did not seek you out. You came to us. You will inevitably come to a crossroads where you must make a choice.
Could you be any more vague? Should I even ask why you have 9-inch nails sticking out of your eyes? The Foreseer let out an amused chuckle without breaking stride as he approached a console located at the very end of the path, just before it dropped off into a massive gorge. His next words were deliberate and cunning as a gaunt hand appeared from the cloak and rested on one of the console's metallic levers.
The real question is, do you want to understand?
The ground beneath us began to rumble as a tumult of agonized wailing erupted from the surrounding heaps. I lost my footing and fell onto the rough gravel. The blackness before us took on a liquid property and gathered at the center of the canyon before it formed into a familiar shape. I stood to my feet as a towering form reflected in my eyes. It was the same construct I saw in the gloom. The monolith. During my awestruck stupor, a rectangular platform appeared beneath the Foreseer and carried him out into the gorge where it hovered at the right side of the monolith. The console simultaneously disappeared into the gravel, leaving me with a perfect view. A second platform appeared perpendicular to the Foreseer before it was engulfed by a helix of violet light, and a shape appeared upon the platform. The mass congealed and twisted into a pair of humanoid figures engaged in intercourse. Following the moans of climax, the figures liquefied and united, and the amalgamation contorted into a shapely female body as black substance crawled up her flawless skin, covering her breasts and vulva. The woman placed her hands over her face as she screamed in agony. Red rivers fell between her fingers, and her wails of pain transformed into sadistic, uncontrolled laughter. Soon, The woman removed her hands, and the horrifying face of the Defiler was revealed. The Foreseer and the Defiler turned to face the monolith as the violet energy reappeared on its exterior. The light formed a vertical line and then elevated itself from the surface. A low hum emanated from the luminescence as it began to separate, creating a three-dimensional opening. The visage of a face wearing a metallic respirator appeared in a rippling projection, and violet light flickered from within soulless black eyes.
Welcome to your destiny, Charles.
A distorted voice resonated from the aperture. The Foreseer raised one of his gaunt hands, and with a snap of his finger, primal fear came rushing back through my veins. I made to escape, but the path behind me had vanished beneath a mass of writhing limbs and groaning faces. I fell to my knees, clutching my beating heart, and began to hyperventilate. I had to regain control of myself. Through panicked breaths, I reasoned that the three creatures had brought me to this place for some reason. If they wanted me dead, they would have already ended my life. If I was to prevent my assimilation into the piles of despair that littered this place, I would have to listen to what they had to say. Truthfully, I've had my fill of cryptic imagery and vague explanations. Whatever this was had to be more important than my fear. I stood to my feet and turned to face the trio behind me. The distorted voice came again.
Are you ready?
Despite the nightmarish appearance of the figure, the words sounded as if they were spoken by a man of reason. I responded with a simple, "Yes."
Very well,
said the distorted voice, as the rippling projection poured onto a third platform that was centered between the others. The cascading matter formed a hovering shape. Its armor emitted a dull shine as the gears embedded in its design rotated like clockwork. A network of tubes pumped black fluids into exposed veins, and a cylindrical headgear towered above all. I felt as if I was in the presence of a deity, and I should be bowing my head. "You are the Emissary."
that is accurate.
The creature confirmed, raising his tube-riddled arms to either side.
We are the three disciples of the great god of the void. He who feeds on mortal dreams, the serpent of the celestial realms. Our Theomorphous.
Why is your god so fucking interested in me? It looks like he has plenty of food from what I can see.
Your emotions are a symptom of your mortal perceptions.
But I am a mortal. How else would I perceive things?
You cannot hide the truth from us, Charles. We know you've yearned for enlightenment your entire life. An unseen power locked inside you has brought you here. This is not beyond your ability to understand. There is but one reason for your hesitation.
I stared into the darkness below as I thought about her beautiful green eyes. The emissary continued.
It is not these constructs of flesh and machine we utilize to contain our true nature, or the mounds of despair that frighten you. It is the prospect of losing her.
I closed my eyes and whispered her name. Julia.
She is the last thing that binds you to the human experience.
I fell to my knees as tears welled up in my eyes. I hated being so defeated by the words of a stranger, but he had done it. he managed to tear down my protective walls and expose my fractured heart with only a few sentences. I was suddenly forced to face the truth that has haunted me ever since the day Julia walked out of my life. I felt the warmth of heartbroken tears rolling down my face as I allowed the truth to be set free.
Julia, why did you leave me? I fucking loved you. I'm so lost without you. Why?
Have no illusions, Charles. That path has ended.
The emissary's emotionless response froze my beating heart. In that very moment, I decided, if the world I knew doesn't care about my suffering, why should I continue to be a part of it? What good is building a new bridge if it just gets torn down all over again? Perhaps these strange entities have something better to offer. A smile formed on my face, and I stood to my feet, allowing the inner darkness to flourish. What do you want me to do? From the needle tips of the Foreseer, a violet hue flashed as her raspy voice fell from grinning black lips.
I believe he now sees the light.
If you happen to be at the corner of Heartbreak Avenue and Dead End Way at approximately 10:30 p.m., you would have seen a spiraling violet light appear in the middle of the street, with two figures materializing within the ray. The kind of thing that ends up on those shitty TV shows showcasing various UFO sightings and paranormal happenings before trying to sell you a magical vitamin that gives you more energy, but only manages to leave a bad taste in your mouth. The Defiler and I stood side by side under the single functioning streetlights on Dead End Way as we looked at the single completed house at the far end of the thoroughfare.
You couldn't have brought us any closer?
I asked, hoping that the Defiler would realize that we were still roughly a half of a mile from our destination and would correct her error. She only offered a playful shrug and a distorted giggle as she began to skip down the road towards the 2-story house at the end of the block. I saw no point in arguing with my lovely yet grotesque companion as I shoved my hands into my pockets and began the long stride. A mixture of both recent and past memories flooded the forefront of my consciousness. I could not remember the pleasure of Julia's body without the crushing pain she left me with. This duality gave way to frustrations of hypothetical judgments manufactured by my experiences with collective society. It vexed me to no end that there are those who reside somewhere out there in the ether that would just expect me to respect a self-serving decision that directly impacts my mental stability and simply move on with my life. This outlook denies my true nature to flourish in its purest form. Perhaps there are those who can easily adapt to unfortunate circumstances, but I'm definitely not one of them. I was wronged, passed up for someone who was subjectively better than me.
Yes, maybe I don't fit in or look good in one of your little internet posts, but at least I have a fucking personality. You bitch.
The violet eyes of the Defiler looked back at me, and I realized that my thoughts had become verbal, which often happens when I'm frustrated. So much complexity encased in my skull. My thoughts would build up into a raging storm that evacuated the mental labyrinth and expelled themselves into the world like toxic waste. The street was lined with skeletal structures of concrete and wood, which would soon be constructed into homes for the simple-minded drones who would occupy them, where they would live out their mundane lives. The Defiler was now posing atop a telephone box, as if she were modeling for some pretentious fashion publication. She held a tiny flower in her right hand and raised it up to her nasal cavity before she widened the row of her silver teeth and devoured it. Despite the appearance of her face and her childish behavior, there are those out there who would obsess over this creature, another aspect of my species I absolutely reviled. I could never allow an interesting thing to just be an interesting thing. Fandom had to form around it, completely ruining its appeal. However, I knew where this obsession stems from. It was a calling of an unkindled primal urge, a tragedy that befell most human beings. But even I must admit the Defiler's tight outfits and shapely body did pull my strings. I could easily picture her on that telephone box, pleasuring herself with one hand as she beckoned me with the other. Her violet-tinted eyes followed me as I walked past. I then heard the soft thud of her leather boots hitting the sidewalk as I deciphered the shape that sat in the driveway of the house at the dead end of Dead End Way. The dynasty symbolized the presence of my arch-nemesis. These were his grounds. The walking female construct behind me was merely the key to the castle. My determination would be my sword. It wasn't long before we stood before the 2-story house. I must admit that I was familiar with this dwelling. I've spent many nights in my car watching this place filled with thoughts of malicious intent, unknowingly foreshadowing this night. How so very amusing. It appeared that Mr. Perfect fancied himself some kind of suburban lumberjack. A tree stump stood aside a stack of planks, an axe embedded into its surface, its handle facing me as if welcoming its use. My hand wrapped around the smooth wooden shaft and dislodged the hatchet from the stump before meeting my companion at the back door. A small sticker read, "This property is under the protection of Sentry Guard Security Services." I turned to my companion. "Do you mind?" The Defiler let out another giggle as she raised her left hand and summoned forth a helix before skipping into the light and disappearing. Moments later, I was greeted by her violet eyes, playfully poking out from the open doorway. Gripping the axe, I entered the house, passing my companion, who now sat at the dining room table, biting into the security panel she had ripped from the wall. Adorable. And made my way to the adjacent staircase and descended them, one creaky step at a time. I made no effort to conceal my presence as I entered the hallway upstairs, slamming the axe into the wall, awakening my nemesis from his slumber. Mr. Perfect appeared at the far end of the hallway, with wide eyes on his face and a loaded revolver in his hand.
Charles? What the fuck are you doing here?
Once he saw the axe in my hands, he realized the purpose of my visit, and he cocked the hammer of his gun and aimed it.
Shit. Drop the fucking axe or I'll shoot!
I felt a sickly grin form on my face. A maniacal laugh escaped my mouth as I raised the axe above my head and charged towards him with blind madness. 6 shots exited the gun's barrel and were instantly evaporated by violet energy. The hatchet then buried itself into the stunned look on Mr. Perfect's face. Approximately 3 hours later, Julia had returned from the graveyard shift at the hospital. When she entered the house and saw the crater in the wall where the security panel used to be, her routine was replaced by panic.
Oh my god, David!
She rushed up the stairs, not even noticing the open back door or the vengeful ghost sitting at the dining room table. Her terrified screams echoed through the house once she saw the hatchet sticking out of Mr. Perfect's skull. Pathetic sobs escaped her mouth as she shambled towards her lover's corpse. Her advance was halted by the sounds of shutter snaps from the darkness behind the fallen body. Julia shrieked as the Defiler emerged.
Such beautiful fear.
A playful voice crackled as a pair of violet eyes entered the hallway, causing Julia to back away. She then bumped into someone standing at the top of the stairs. She spun around, and her eyes met the gaze of a man deprived of sanity. Her scream was silenced as my hand covered her mouth. "Hello, my love." Hellish insanity had completely consumed me. It was as if my own words were foreign to me. I forced Julia to look at my approaching companion. "I've been chosen, Julia. They can see what you never saw. My potential, my greatness." Julia struggled as the Defiler drew closer. "It'll all be over soon, baby. I promise." The light appeared from the Defiler's left hand and engulfed us. I released my grip on Julia. There was nowhere she could run. Her mortal perception consumed her as she looked from side to side, taking in the heaps of wailing ambrosia as contorted faces moaned and emaciated limbs reached out in endless melancholy. Julia's terror was cut short by the shaking ground. A tremendous rumble resounded from the dark chasm before us as the monolith erected itself. 3 solid platforms materialized above the darkness, and a violet tri-beam projected from the monolith's surface, summoning the Foreseer, the Defiler, and the Emissary.
Where am I, Charles? Who the fuck are they?
Julia shouted before the back of my hand met her right cheek, sending her to the ground. It wasn't in my nature to strike a woman, but my eagerness for the endgame dissolved such principles. Julia clutched the side of her face as she looked up at me with a deeply wounded expression. "Shut up, Julia. I can't hear what they have to say over your whining." I saw anger well up in her eyes, but before she could spit venom at me, the distorted voice of the Emissary cut in.
"We stand upon the precipice of a great becoming. The 4th disciple of the Great Serpent has accepted his destiny. May his potential flourish beyond the constraints of his mortal perception."
The Emissary's black eyes turned violet, and a familiar glow surrounded Julia as she stood to her feet.
"Embrace him, Charles, and enlighten her before you begin this journey."
I wrapped my arms around the woman I once loved and spoke softly into her ear. "Julia, you were the one person I have ever truly loved. And you left me a broken man, but you unknowingly opened a door, and the void you left inside me brought me to this place." From the dark depths below, a towering mound of wailing faces rose up. I looked into Julia's green eyes. "By destroying the light, you allowed darkness to take my soul." I kissed her lips and released her as the black tendrils of Ophiomorphus enveloped her. She screamed in terror and struggled in vain as her body was raised above the towering form.
Charles, I'm sorry. Please don't let them take me.
Julia plummeted, and red streams sprayed over my face as her body was torn apart and devoured. My humanity died, and madness took hold, rushing through me like a crimson tide. The Tower of Faces disappeared into the shadow as my blood-drenched body was hoisted into the chamber. Uncontrolled barks of laughter consumed me as the blades left the cylinders and descended upon my flesh, shedding my mortal perception.
Thank you for watching this episode of Creep O'Clock. A very special thank you to all the talents who brought this story to life. Links to their social media can be found in the description. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. I've been your host, Mr.X. Take care, my friends, and may your nights be full of dreams.